Hello, everyone. I'm Regina Gill. I'm the founder and executive director of Gold Coast Arts, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this installment of our Cultural Insider series featuring book talks, Gold Coast Arts Book Talks. Our featured author today is Dr. Meryl Ain, who has written a book called The Takeaway Men. This is the book, and I hope that you will be moved to read it, certainly to be a part of the conversation. She's going to have national conversations about this book in book clubs across the country. But Dr. Meryl Ain is a writer, author, and career educator. Her articles and essays have appeared in the New York Times, in Huffington Post, the New York Jewish Week, Kveller, Newsday, and other publications. In 2014, she co-authored the award-winning book, The Living Memories Project, Legacies That Last. And in 2016, wrote a companion workbook, My Living Memories Project Journal. The Takeaway Men, her debut novel, is the result of her lifelong quest to learn more about the Holocaust. A thirst that was triggered by reading The Diary of Anne Frank in the 6th grade. She has been reading and writing, researching, and teaching about the Holocaust ever since, as a history teacher, an author, a school administrator, and as a lifelong learner. Meryl holds degrees from Queens College, Columbia University, and Hofstra University. She lives on Long Island with her husband, Stuart Ain, an award-winning journalist in his own right. It is my pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Meryl Ain. Hello, Meryl. How are you today?
Hi, Regina. I'm good, and I'm so happy to be with you today. Thanks to the Gold Coast Arts Center for inviting me, and I'm really excited to be interviewed by you.
Well, we're excited, and we were excited as soon as we heard the book. I particularly was excited. Let me just hold up a copy of the book for people who are going to be watching. If you haven't bought it yet, I think you should. I think that it's a read that everyone should read. Particularly people who don't really know about the story that's being told in here, which you're going to learn more about as Meryl and I move along in our conversation. So, Meryl, we're going to start by saying welcome, and also thank you, because we know that Gold Coast Arts is the first stop on your book tour, so to speak, and we're very pleased and proud that you are with us. So, since it's The Takeaway Men, this is your first appearance on in a live interview, which is going to be taped. But but in addition, The Takeaway Men is a first novel for you, although you're no novice to writing. So you've published works of nonfiction, articles, essays, books. You want to talk about all the things that you've done in your life, and I know that your biography is a very impressive one. Do you want to talk about all the threads in your life and how they came together for you to write this book?
Okay, sure, Regina. So I have been interested in the Holocaust ever since I first heard the word concentration camp when I was a child, and I don't remember exactly at what age it was. So I've been thinking about what it means. I've been studying, researching it ever since.
But what was it about this Holocaust? And I know you're a historian and you're an accomplished historian and teacher, but what made you go away from the nonfiction track and decide to tackle a novel?
Okay, I in my nonfiction, I'd written essays. I wrote, co-authored a book with my husband, Stuart, The Living Memories Project, Legacies That Last, in which we interviewed more than 30 people. And we interviewed a number of Holocaust survivors for that. I've written opinion pieces about the Holocaust. And I've been really interested in the themes and the issues raised by the Holocaust. And every day they seem to me that they're more and more current. So the idea of what is our responsibility towards others. What do we do when we see evil? Do we speak out against it? Do we take action, or do we just turn our heads and pretend that we don't see? How do we treat people who are different? I mean, these are essential questions of the Holocaust, but they're also essential questions for today. So I have been thinking about, writing about it, as you said, teaching about it, even as a school administrator. I brought in programs and participated in programs. When I was in Smithtown, we had a Holocaust survivor along with a young woman who was a survivor of the Rwandan genocide. And I actually wrote a piece about that for the New York Times. So these are things that were on my radar screen. I just at one point decided that I thought a novel would be a better vehicle to raise these questions and to tell the story.
Well, I'm glad you did, because I think that there's an opportunity in a novel to bring out the emotion and to explore the psychology in a way that maybe is not as available to you in nonfiction. The Holocaust is very difficult terrain. I mean, emotionally, certainly artistically. You have to draw a balance. So I understand what drew you to this story and what drew you to this era, but once you began the process, how did you feel as you were dealing with this, with the creation of these characters? Some of them damaged people, some of them. I'm not giving too much away. So, but what impact did it have on you as you were writing and doing all this homework? Because you were immersed in it for how long?
3 years, but I have really been, as I said, obsessed with the topic, I think, since I first found out about Anne Frank. And I read about it, I've been researching it, I watch every documentary I can about it. So it's interesting because I am not a child of Holocaust survivors. In fact, my parents were born here, and both my parents served in the Army, in the United States Army in World War II. So I don't have a familiar connection to it, but I've known survivors, I've been friends with survivors and with the second generation. So I feel extremely connected to this time period. And the more I researched it and the more I wrote, I just felt that it is also a story for today, that it's a cautionary tale.
Now, you talk about second generation. People who are not connected to the topic won't necessarily understand the designation. So I know that I'm sort of 1.5 generations since I was born in a displaced persons camp. I'm second generation, yes, but born over there, that puts us in a whole other category. But most people don't know the story of the post-war survivors, the survivors who spent months and years. My parents were in a displaced persons camp for 5 years. They think that the war is over, everybody go home or go to the country of choice, and now you can start your new life, and everybody starts their new life, and yay. That's not quite how it was. So what made you decide to situate your story post-World War II and deal with the survivors?
A few reasons. I have very close friends who are children of survivors, and I've been very interested and intrigued by their varying reactions. I think the 50s and the early 60s, which I cover in the novel, are just rife with contradictions. You know, on the one hand, it was an idyllic time period where, you know, the veterans all came back from the war, and everyone bought their little houses, and there were businesses booming. Like I mentioned, the deodorant business, the plastics business. It was a time of great optimism. TV was coming into its own. You know, Howdy Doody, kids were watching, and it's portrayed often as a very positive time. It was also, it's been portrayed, which is correct, a time of great conformity. And there was also an underlying current that was very dark and dangerous, to all this, you know, happiness and the war's over and we're going to move on with our lives. There was the Cold War, the threat of nuclear warfare. Children had to crouch under their desks in school in take cover drills. There was the Red Scare, the McCarthy hearings, and of course the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg trial, which is another topic that I am obsessed with and have studied at great length, and that I had to include a bit about that in the book. And of course, they were Jewish, and some people felt that there was that was anti-Semitism. So I think that this was a period with a lot of contradictions, and the survivors came here into what looked like a perfect world, especially from where they came. And in addition to the same issues and problems that everybody else was dealing with secretly, they had a whole host of other problems. I mean, they brought with them, as you well know, I mean, this incredible trauma unknown in the history of the world. And how could you be expected, you know, without counseling, without support, without anything, to just come and start a new life? And of course that was going to have an effect on their families. So I wanted to write about that. I've read Menachem Rosensaft collected essays from children of survivors, and Helen Epstein has done a lot of work, but I really, there might be a couple, but I really don't know if it's been written a lot about in fiction. So I wanted to tackle that.
Well, the only one that I can think of off the top of my head involved a non-Jewish survivor, and that would have been Styron's Sophie's Choice. But that would have
right.
been, but that's about the only one that comes to my mind. And
yeah,
also different concept. So you're talking about your growing up, which clearly was a different growing up than the characters who come from the other side, the twins notably. We'll get to them in a minute. But what was your growing up like? What was your neighborhood like? Any of these threads, these darker threads, running through acquaintances or friends that your parents may have had or that you had as a child, not necessarily later on as you got to know children of survivors? Were they part of your,
I'm sorry, what?
Were they part of your world? Was there any thought about the school that I went to? There were 3 of us in the class whose parents were survivors. We all happened to be named Regina.
Really?
honest to God. It was the weirdest thing. And it sounded okay, but there were, in the course of my life going through school, I did know, but I grew up in the city. I grew up in the Bronx in Manhattan, so different, but you grew up in a more suburban environment, described beautifully and in detail in the book. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, let me say a couple of things about that first. So I had to make 2 very important decisions when I was starting to write the book. I had to decide where my characters came from and where they were going to. And I researched where they were going to come from. So I looked into Amsterdam, like Anne Frank, but then I said I didn't want to do a replay of Anne Frank. I looked at France, I looked at Germany, and I looked at Poland. And I kind of became fixated on Poland and started researching Poland. About the same time, Stuart and I were in the Berkshires, and we went to a film festival where they showed a documentary called Bogdan's Journey. It was about the Kels pogrom, which is a very little known historical fact, which took place in Poland in 1946, July 4th, more than a year after the war was over in Europe. And armed militia, Polish civilians, and police attacked Jews in the street. These were Jews who were staying at the Jewish Community Center. They were survivors. They had nowhere else to go. They were downtrodden. They were depressed. They were emaciated. It's a story. You'll read about it in the book. But it was based on a rumor. And this mob killed more than 40 Jews and injured more than 40. And the light bulb went off in my head. And I said, this has to be where my survivors come from, because how could such a thing happen? How could that happen a year after the war had been engulfed by World War II and by Hitler's final solution? It was unbelievable to me. So I had them come from Kels. And then the question was, where were they going to go? So they always say you should write what you know. I brought them to my community in Belrose, which, as Regina implied, was a bit of a stretch because people there could afford to buy their own homes, although they were modest. You really wouldn't expect survivors off the boat to go and purchase a house, which I think at that time must have cost $10,000, which was a lot of money then. Anyway, so I had them living with cousins there. But to answer your question, Regina, I wouldn't know if any of my friends had parents who were Holocaust survivors. There were people. There was a woman who owned a dress shop who had an accent. I had friends who came later, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, whose parents had accents, but nobody ever talked about it. So, but I would say overall, the community was American. It was about half Jewish, half Italian, Irish, a few Protestants, and then there were some Chinese people who had come after the Chinese Revolution. So I don't know, because people didn't talk about it.
So you've created this environment, this neighborhood, this community, just as you're describing, a mixed community with Jews and Italians and non-Jews and practicing and otherwise. And yet there is an understeam, in a darker side, that doesn't become immediately apparent. There, as you start, and again, people will have to read the book to see what happens once the mask starts slipping from all of these people's lives and idyllic circumstances. It seems like almost everybody in Belrose had a secret, or at least it was living a double life, or was it definitely a more complicated person than your first introduction to them appears. You've created these characters. Were they combinations of other people you knew, or were they emblematic of certain themes you just wanted to get out there?
I would say both. I would say that all characters, I mean, of course, they're all fictional. They're never one person. I think all characters are composites. In one of the writing courses I took, there was some very good advice. They said, if you're going to write about emotion, the situation is different for your character, but think about when you had that emotion. and write that. So there were a few things that actually happened to me in my childhood. There's a discussion about hell, and that actually happened. But I mean, it's fictionalized. Certainly, Jewish children had to sing Christmas carols in public school at that time. But the actual, the dark secrets, those were, I based a lot of that on research, especially the Rosenberg case. I did a tremendous amount of research on that, and it is not far-fetched at all. That did happen to people.
I remember going to see, there was actually a Broadway play that I saw in the I want to say the 1960s, probably was, the late 60s. And it was the story of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. I want to say that it was Eli Wallach and Ann Jackson. I don't know why I want to say that, but for some reason I think it was like them. But I'll look it up. But it made such an impact on me because, among other things, you're left with not really knowing, did they, didn't they? You're horrified at the execution. But at the conclusion of the play, the entire theater, they must have pumped this acrid, smoky thing in. It was the most virtual reality, bizarro kind of thing that they did. But they wanted you to really feel like if you had been there, you would have had to smell this set. It was horrible.
Oh my gosh. Well,
yeah, I guess they wanted to make the point. And so do you, make the point, the fear, the tension, the worry, the knock on the door. It's like nothing's changed.
And it's interesting because for our first book, The Living Memories Project, Stuart and I interviewed Robert Miracle, who is the son of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And he was, at the time we interviewed him, I think he's in his early 70s now, but he was in his maybe 10 years ago, so he was probably in his early 60s. And you know, the trauma was still very real for him, and he talked about that the last day that he saw his parents. But the whole thing about, as I said, I researched it tremendously. I don't remember hearing about the Rosenbergs through my childhood at all. I mean, maybe I heard about it in high school or college, but I don't remember. I mean, my parents always, the one thing that is kind of true in there, my parents never wanted me to hear anything, but they tried to shield us from everything. But I did have a friend on the block who heard everything and who shared it. So that had a basis in truth in it.
Well, you've actually packed a lot of history, not surprisingly, into the course of the narrative. What were your milestones as you knew that you wanted to touch base on this topic, this topic, this topic? Did you create an outline for how you were going to do this and then find a character that would move the story forward? What was your process?
That's a good question. I wrote a lot of notes. I made outlines, but I didn't follow them. I wrote a lot of drafts that I threw away, and I just continued to read and research. And I did have to give my husband credit. I did bounce a lot off him, and I bounced some things off others as well. And so especially this story about the former Nazi that works in the kosher deli. That was, you know, we bounced that off each other. He said to me, "Oh, you have to have a former Nazi in there," and I said, "No, I don't know," because you know, it's one of the things I found in my research that was just unbelievable was that, and this is true. Nobody in America cared about Nazis during that time period. It was all about communism and fighting communists. And in fact, the US government sponsored about 1,000 former Nazis to come to the United States and work in the Los Alamos and in the space program. So I guess to answer your question, I had an idea. I knew that I wanted to raise the issue that we spoke of earlier. What's your responsibility to others? How do we treat those who are different? I'm also very interested in the question of religious identity. You know, is it fluid? Is it what you're born? Is it a bloodline? Is it what you choose? I was very interested in those topics. So to answer your question, once I got into the flow, the characters kind of led me.
And that's what most authors will tell you, that they start speaking back to you. You start
Yeah.
putting dialogue in their mouths and now they talk right back to you. So now this question, I'm sure everyone's going to ask you, and you will have an answer that's close to home. But twins. Now, twins are a loaded topic when it comes to the Holocaust, because twins were obviously the victims of the notorious angel of death, Mengele. And twins occupy a very special place in many Victorian novels and through the history of writing fiction as well. So, but you've chosen twins, not best girlfriends, not, you know, other vehicles. You've chosen deliberately twins to be the bearers of two perspectives in your book. And would you want to talk about that?
Sure, why not? So I'll start. I don't know which way to start. I'll start with the confession. So I am married to an identical twin. My husband, Stuart, who actually grew up in Great Neck with his brother, Howard, are identical. And in fact, I dated Howard first, and they switched. So I've been entrenched with the twins for many years. Even at our wedding, I insisted that Howard wear a pink shirt, so people would distinguish him from the groom, but people gave him envelopes anyway. And when he walked down the aisle, people laughed because they used to look so much alike. They don't really look, they look like brothers now. They don't look that much alike. So it's been interesting. It's been challenging. That would be a whole other conversation. But what I learned from observing and interacting with these twins for all these years, and these are identical twins, is although they're very alike in many ways, and they're very close, they're incredibly close. And I also read some books about girl twins, Abigail Pogrebin's book, and also Jenna Bush Hager's book. Jenna is a fraternal twin, Abigail is an identical twin. The twins are usually very close. They know what the other one is thinking, but they're different. They're different. And they have different reactions to the same things. And even if they've shared a womb and they've shared parents and they've shared the same environment, they're different human beings. And the way I can just put it, simply, at one point I said, when they still looked alike, they may have the same container, but they have different souls or, different characters. So I thought that this would be a good vehicle. I thought about sisters, but I thought twins, because the twins had the exact same environment. Exactly. And in the second generation friends that I've had, and the research that I've done, you cannot paint them with one stroke. They're very different. Certain things are the same, you know, that cloud of the Holocaust is with them, but people react very differently. So, you know, some embrace it and others want to run as far as they can from it, and they're all shades in between. So that's why I chose twins.
But I think that was a wise choice, and it really worked. It worked well. So that was a topic that I'm glad that you illuminated. I happen to have gone to high school with the High School of Music and Art with identical two peas in a pod twin sisters, and you couldn't find two sisters who wanted to be more different from each other. And when one was preppy and bobbed her hair, the other one had hippie hair down to her butt. One was an art student, the other one was a music student. You could not find two sisters who wanted to rip whatever it was that made them the same and identify themselves separately from each other if you tried. I often wonder what became of them, and I should actually Google
them. Maybe they're on Facebook.
I wonder if I should do that. I think that's actually. But they were both wonderful girls, and they just didn't really. They wanted to be wonderful in different ways. So that was interesting to me about your twins. You also talk about memory and the power of memory, and obviously you've done your project on memory and recollections and so forth. So how did that play into all this under the tip of the iceberg, all this stuff that you've had? Now you're bringing it into your book. How did you do that?
Well, in terms of our first book, we interviewed more than 30 people about how they keep the memories of loved ones alive after they're gone in very tangible ways. And people had all different ways of doing it. I wrote the book really as a way to heal myself, because I'd lost both my parents within a year and a half, and I found it very healing. In terms of this book, it's critically important to remember the Holocaust, to remember those who perished, to remember and have empathy for the survivors who are dwindling each year. But it's also it's important to remember the second generation and even the third generation who've been touched by this. And I have to say, speaking about Facebook, I've been on Facebook a lot with the book, and I found it overall a good platform, for people who are interested in the topic. But I have to say that I have been trolled by neo-Nazis, that they write nasty things, and they're still out there. And in fact, there was a recent article that there are some people in Germany who are blaming COVID. Still, it just
Cut.
what happened? It tipped over.
Of course it did.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So
I have to start over.
There's people in Germany who are neo-Nazis.
Oh yeah. So there's a recent article about.
Wait, cut. Take a breath. Beat. Start again.
From Germany?
Yes, there was a recent article.
Okay, there was a recent article that there are those in Germany who are blaming the COVID pandemic on the Jews.
Of course.
It doesn't end. And so basically, I think that just ties all the themes of my book together, and it is definitely applicable to today, as is the title, The Takeaway Men. So the Nazis took away children from parents, and then we have some examples of the takeaway men in the book. And it occurred to me, they're separating children from parents on the southern border. So I think we must remember, you've got to remember, because all these issues, we just keep reliving these issues over and over again. You know, aren't we all responsible for one another? Do we have compassion? Do we have empathy for people? And so when you remember, I would think that that would make you have more empathy and be kinder, I would hope.
God, I hope so. And I certainly hope that when people read this book, that will give them pause for thought, and definitely its relevance. It almost feels, my mother is 93. And,
oh, wow, God bless her.
God bless, she'll be 94 very shortly. And she's devastated that she's lived long enough to see the same themes and the same movement that she remembers as a child, of the leftists and the radicals on the right, and the struggle between the communists and the Nazis and the neo-Nazis. And she just is horrified to see that it's back. She honestly believes that all the threads are there, and she's hoping to God that it doesn't, that somehow, some way, there will be a way out so that we can avoid what happened during World War II.
It's very frightening. It's very frightening. But what I tell my children, which is what my mother always told me, is, you know, this too shall pass. So nothing lasts forever. But I think, you know, what Santayana said, if we don't remember history, we're condemned to repeat the past. So I don't know. I hope that people remember.
Well, you've done your part, I have to say, and you've done it well. So as we finish our conversation, and I hope this isn't the last time we get to talk, because I really have, one of the benefits of my job is that I get to meet people like you. And I'm a crazy reader. So for me, it's, somebody says in the office, can you read this book? I go, oh, sure. That's my pleasure. But I recently read, and I think I sent you the notes on this, because I read P.D. James. I don't know if you've ever read anything by P.D. James, but she's, one of my vices is to read detective novels. And she's a British writer who's written probably among the best in that whole genre. But she talks about, and I'm not going to go into it, but she talks about how people, and you'll find this when you go on your book tours, is people who are aspiring writers will approach you and will ask you, how do you become a writer? What would you advise? So I know what she would advise. What would you advise?
Okay, so I would say, number one, you have to read in the genre in which you want to write. You have to read a lot to learn what makes a book great and what makes it so-so. I would say read books about the genre, and definitely, if you can, take classes. And if you can't take them in person, you can take them online. There was a writing instructor, probably around the turn of the 20th century, named Brenda Euland. She wrote a book, If You Want to Write, and she gives advice to writers, and she says, just be bold and courageous. Don't be inhibited, just be bold and courageous. And Judy Blume, I saw her in a master class. She said, my first draft is always a mess. It's just a mess. Understand that it will be a mess, but if you want to do it, stick with it. And I remember the words of my 10th grade journalism teacher. He said to the class, not just to me, your words are not immortal. And then you have to edit. And good books are constantly being edited. And you have to develop a thick skin. Everybody's not going to love what you write. Even the #1 New York Times bestseller, everybody is not going to love it. If there is an audience of people who like it or love it, that's great. But everybody will not love it, and you just have to, if you want to do it, you have to stick with it, and you have to believe in yourself.
So as we wind down from our conversation about the takeaway men, and it's been I think, a very interesting and illuminating one. And I hope that people who are going to log on to see this will, even if they haven't yet read the book, will be inspired to go get it. And that it will be an appetizer for them. And for the people who have read the book, that it will be illuminating for them on some of the things that you touched on, so that when they go back and rethink it, they'll understand some of the background on it. What are your upcoming events as you move forward in promoting the book? Do you have anything you want to share with the audience?
Okay.
Where can they find you? Let's do that.
Okay, well, I'm doing a program on August 20th at the Hampton Synagogue, and it is scheduled, technology doesn't always work, but it's scheduled to be broadcast on JBS TV. If you have that on your cable, you can watch it. If you don't have it, you can get it online. It will be streamed online, JBS TV. I think it's .org. I just spoke with her yesterday, and because I had a lot of things scheduled, but I don't know what's going to happen with them. I'm going to be doing a program with the Holocaust Museum and Tolerance Center on September 13th. I don't know whether that is going to be live or virtual or anything. So stay tuned for that. I have some I have a lot of book clubs scheduled. I should mention that because of COVID, and I had envisioned traveling all over the country and speaking. I don't think that's happening so soon. So I'm challenging myself this year to meet with 100 book clubs virtually.
Wonderful.
So if anybody has a book club and you want to read the book, and then I will come and discuss the book with you, I'd be happy to do that. You can find me at my website, merylain.com. There's information about book clubs, and there's some sample questions for discussion, which I'd be happy to tailor to your group. I have some events in November. I'm doing Hadassah region. I have a lot of things. I'm doing some virtual events in Florida, but everything is pretty much up in the air right now. So, but the Hampton and the Holocaust Museum and Tolerance Center have been confirmed.
Just clarify, when you said the Hamptons, you're talking about West Hampton Jewish Center.
I'm sorry, the Hampton Synagogue in West Hampton, Rabbi Mark Meyer.
Okay, so that was what I wanted to just clarify for anybody who might be out there, and that will be
August 20th at 7:30 p.m.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Meryl. Any last thoughts? No, I think that's about it. Well, on that note, then we can say it's a wrap. And I thank you once again for being with us and allowing us to be the first in on your conversation about the book.
Thank you.
But again, The Takeaway Men. Thank you, and
thank you. Thanks, Regina.
Pleasure.